Ask the Podcast Coach for May 2nd, 2020.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only from the AverageGuy.tv, Mr. Jim Cullison. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. It actually takes a little practice to get those pointing things right. You have to kind of remember to go the
other direction,
the other way to you what you're grabbing. We have a sponsor now.
We do have a sponsor.
We're super excited. So the morning pour, remember right here with coffee. Morning pour today sponsored by podcastbranding.co. Dave, what do we know about them?
What do we know about them? We know that it is affordable, professionally designed podcast websites and artwork to help your show stand out. Cover art, logos, websites, social media, ebooks, lead magnets, a blog, about me pages, whatever you need over there. He is an award-winning graphic and web designer. We're talking about Mark Decotes. I always say Decotes. It's not Decotes. It's a silent S. How do you have a silent? Is that a Canadian thing? I don't know. But he's got over.
We like Mark a lot.
Yeah, he's got over 30 years in the design field. He's been podcasting. That's the other nice thing about it. He is a podcaster as well, and he's been podcasting since 2013. Branded over 100 podcasts. He's eager to work with you. What's Mark's mission? It's to ensure your podcast looks as professional as possible, offering you the best chance at success. And again, you can find him at podcastbranding.co. And did I just remove Jim? Nope, I need to remove you. I'm so confused. Thanks to podcastbranding.co for being the sponsor. And
does some really good work too, Dave. You were showing me some of the things he was doing for you.
Here's the fun thing that's cool about Mark.
Coffee's delicious, by the way, Mark. Thanks for sponsoring. Extra special too.
Is I woke up at 4 a.m. because that's what you do in a pandemic. Sleeping is kind of optional these days. And I said, you know what? The podcast rodeo show, if you look at my current artwork, it's a guy riding a horse. It says podcast rodeo show. But from the artwork, do you know that this is really a review show? And I thought, you know what? How can I tie podcasting to rodeo? And I was like, ooh, you could take a mic stand and throw horseshoes around it. Because when I was growing up, we played a lot of horseshoes at my grandpa's house, or as we called it, ow, you broke my shin. But some people call it horseshoes. And so I came up with this idea, threw it at Mark, and then he said, and this is what Mark usually does. He knows me, he knows the show, but normally he would have gotten on the phone with me, talked about what I wanted. He'd go listen to the show to kind of get the flavor and the vibe of it. And so he said, well, I did what you asked. He goes, but I came up with some other ideas. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So here was one. It's got a cow on it and a microphone. And I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. And then this one is like a brand, like, you would put on a cow or something like that. It's got that kind of burnt kind of look to it, which was kind of cool. Big RSS logo in the middle of it. And I was like, all right, that's pretty cool too. And then this one is kind of a fancy lettering with a lasso around the word rodeo. And I was like, that's pretty cool. It's got kind of this almost like a leatherish kind of background to it. And this is the one that I just started laughing, and I love it. And it's basically a lasso around a blue Yeti. It kind of almost like a Showtime at the Apollo kind of vibe to it, where it's pulling it off the stage. And for me, I was like, okay, that's because I said, you know what? This is a podcast about podcasting. We kind of need the microphone where everybody else throws a microphone in when it's the, Bill Smith show, that we don't really need a microphone in there. We also don't need the word podcast in there. But in this case, this is a podcast about podcasting. And so I told him, I said, that's the one I want. And and that was just, to me, an example of, if I can find I always hate this with Microsoft, the back arrow. There it is. I started off with this.
Which I like, by the way. I like that one. It's a little busy. Well, it's a little busy and it's a little detailed. So as you get smaller, right, it gets harder.
Yeah.
But I do like that, hey, that you're using the stand as the horseshoe thing. I like it. I like it. It's not my favorite, but I like it. So
did you have a favorite?
So this one was my favorite, to be honest.
Okay.
This one here, we're getting all kinds of different this is the hard thing about branding is you get all these different opinions in the chat room. Some like it. This was my favorite of them. This was the one I liked.
Yeah, see, now Carrie says I don't really like the Blue Yeti one. And so it kind of depends. See, that one, I like it because it makes me laugh, but that's
be careful though. What if Blue comes out and says, like,
this
I
one
don't
was
think
pretty
so,
cool.
Dave. Yeah,
I kind of like this one.
Yeah.
None of them are bad. So it's just and if I was smart, what I would do now is put this up to a vote and throw it out there.
Well, I think maybe you go through a second round. So you've got 5 things that all have these different elements and they're all pretty varied. And you narrow that down to 1 or 2 and say, okay, what are the elements that I like? I think you also have to ask the question, do I want flat? Do I want these backgrounds flat so that they fit a website? Do I need to think about an inverse of that?
Is this going to go on a t-shirt?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Carrie says it looks like R2D2 bring news.
Well,
and then she says, I also like this one, the one that's kind of got a leatherish background and the words podcast radio show.
The problem is the leather background at times. If you're going to do that on a website that's white, you're gonna have to invert that in some way or put a circle around it or do something to kind of capture that background in. But this is the point of branding, right? There are tons of different options now that you have. I think if you create a logo and you've done it once and you haven't worked with somebody who's good at this stuff, like Mark, it's your first work is never good enough. Like it's not. Maybe every once in a while lightning strikes and you have something that's great. But I think the best logos I've seen are those ones that have been worked and argued about and done and overdone and done again and redone. That's why it's a good I think it's just good practice to work, especially around branding, someone like Mark who is a different set of eyes and maybe who's seen a lot of different things and can kind of think through, okay, where are all the places this branding stuff is going? And the guys I listen to on Cigar Authority, the 2 guys cigars, their logo is a cartoon. And one of the hosts constantly complaining that it's not it's hard to make a t-shirt it's hard to that style of brand is hard to put on products.
Look who's in the chat room. And Mark DeCote. It is a silent S. So so it is, it's tough. Mark, if you want, I should put that up here. If anybody wants to jump in, we're at askthepodcastcoach.com/join. And if you have any questions, we're here to answer those.
Yeah, I just think that logo work it's important, that branding work, right? That you're doing. I think that's important. It's really, really hard for a lot of people because it's super personal. And Dave, I've watched you do this a bunch of times where you start working on a logo at like 2 a.m. and you're 2 hours into it and you're like, oh, screw it, I'm just going to use this. And then you wake up the next morning and you're like, that's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, but I'm kind of married to it now because I just put it on all my websites. So I think this idea of branding this, and it's not just logos, right? It's how the whole brand feels across all your sites. And what kind of fonts are you using and how are the fonts tied in and what do things look like? And what's your, what is it when people land on your page, what should they expect? So this is good to, I think, in an area where it's good to move slower than to go faster. That's my current one. And I just went, man, it looks like, I don't know, somebody threw up some font and found a clip art. Yeah. Which is kind of what I did. And I went, And how long do you think it took you to put that together? 10 minutes, if that, on Canva. Yeah. And remember, this show, I didn't care about it because it was like, well, I'm going to do this maybe for a couple weeks and then this show's done. It was never supposed to last because I didn't have time to do another show. I was like, So that's always, so I was like, hey, you know what? This show's going to stick around. I might as well maybe just make it look pretty. And I wanted to, because Mark has done, he's the guy that did the logo behind me. Yeah, which is beautiful, by the way. Yeah. Beautiful. And I just went, you know what? I want to go through the Mark
process of ordering and that whole 9 yards. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know what needs a facelift is the rodeo show. So I was like,
Yeah.
all right, let's do that.
So podcastbranding.co, right? That's where
Yeah.
we go. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So Mark, thanks for sponsoring us over the next month of May. Thank God, Dave, we've made it into the month of May. Like March ended. The 60 days of March have ended.
Yeah, it's
61,
it'll be,
I guess, technically.
Well, I went out last night to Chipotle because I'd not had Chipotle in a while, and I was like, you know what? I don't know about you, but by the end of the week, normally I do not have I don't have an issue with my job. I like my job, but recently we've been super busy.
Yeah.
And
just really intense.
Yeah. And it's just come Friday, I was like, if I was a consumer of adult beverages, I would be consuming adult beverages. And I said, well, let's get some Chipotle instead. And so I got my mask, and the way Chipotle worked, which was weird. Last time you used to go in and pick up the takeout because you can't eat in. And what they did is they just had one person that would run out and say, okay, who's here? And there's like 10 of us there at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so that was different. And I was the only person with a mask.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, oh, so apparently everybody thinks it's ollie income free. And the thing that really spooked me about this is, did we talk about Harry Duran last week?
I know we talk about him every week.
Yeah, that's true. But Harry's one of his, and I'm so sad to hear this, one of Harry's, he called it beyond high school best friend ever kind of guy, got the virus and died. And I don't know how old Harry is, 40, 50, something in there.
I think he's just a little bit younger than me. I think he's 50, 51, something like that. Yeah. And
that's when I went, so I'm assuming this guy is Harry's age. And I went, you know what? I'm not going to play around with this.
Yeah.
So
we're Dave, we're pretty susceptible at our age. I mean, we don't have health conditions and some of those things that make those odds a little bit better, but it's some serious business. And I think it's going to be a summer struggle, and we may even struggle into the fall. So I think a lot of people are just hoping we get back to normal. And there's such this is like a puzzle. I mentioned this on a podcast the other day. This is like a puzzle that it didn't just get taken apart and we have to put it back together the same way it was before. This is a puzzle that got taken apart and then all the pieces changed. And it's in fact now the picture is maybe just a one color. We have a really hard problem to solve, and I think podcasters are in a really good spot to help people get through this, because it's not just, things are not going to just open up and everybody's going to go back to normal. We've got to put some things back together. And so I think podcasters are in a really good spot to help people work their way through this thing, whether that's employment or it's in the career space, whether it's in the travel space. Like, travel has to be put back together. That's a Humpty Dumpty thing that, travel is going to need, it's going to take, I don't know. I don't know how that works. I don't know how we're going to put that thing back together again. So, we've got a lot of work to do. And I just think podcasters are in a particularly unique situation to be able to help with that and to continue to spread positive news through this.
Let me throw this up here just to show you what's going on. This is from My Podcast Reviews. If you want to check that out, schoolofpodcasting.com/MPR for My Podcast Reviews. And Daniel's got these awesome industry stats over there. And you can see in April, the number of new shows added went through the roof. And so that's going to be interesting to see. The other thing, in case anybody wonders, I'll leave this up on my screen here. This is what's going on. There is a link here that I've affectionately referred to as more crappy shows on the way, because, and you guys know, I'm using the Rodecaster. I love Rode stuff, but they have a contest. It's back. They did this before where you submit your podcast and a chance to win stuff. And I scrolled down and they said, blah, 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 upload your podcast to Anchor, my Rodecaster official hosting platform. You can create an Anchor account for free here. And I just went, okay, I get why they did this. It's easy. It's free. Everybody can do it. But I was like, here we go again with a bunch of shows that are going to create, in this case, maybe one episode, because the idea is you upload this kind of sample of your show, and then they pick one, and then you win a bunch of stuff. And I was just like, more free shows that are going to sit there and clutter up the place. And I was like,
Rode is doing this. Okay. And are they recommending a certain host?
Yeah, it's upload your podcast to Anchor. My Rodecaster. That's the title of this contest. It's a contest. Entering my Rodecaster is super easy. Just register, record your podcast, upload it, and get sharing. What I'm not seeing, you will receive a confirmation email once it's been submitted. Share your podcast and encourage your fans to vote for it. Last year, they gave away a boatload of stuff. So that's because I remember I was one of the prizes of that, which was kind of cool. So I'm going to reach out to them and go, hey, can I be a prize again? That was a nice bit of exposure. But I just saw that and was like, oh, and again, I understand if I'm Rode, why they would do that, because it is easy to upload audio to that and that whole 9 yards. But I was just like, here we go with a bunch of.
I think I asked you this question last week. Why do we care? I think we maybe we focus on bad shows a little too much, and there's some great ones out there that are doing really, really well. Let them clog it up a little bit. I don't think it hurts anybody to have people at least trying. Why do you think? Okay, so lockdown for us here in the United States happens mid-March for most people, and then this big surge that comes in later March, early April. I'm going to say April never existed, but let's just say it did for a second. So do you think, is it because more information workers, those who are working from home or could work from home, because it's not our healthcare workers that are creating podcasts. Like, they've been busy beyond belief. It's not our first responders. It's not our police department, right? It's not those people. It's got to be folks who are in the information space who are now working from home, who just decided, hey, I don't want to watch hours of Netflix. I'm going to create my own podcast. Do you think that's what happened to create all this additional, or is it corporations who have now figured out, hey, look, we just sent most of our folks home. We have an opportunity to get into this podcasting space. Let's do it now. What do you think, Dave?
I think it's a little more of the first. And it might be, again, it might be both. You think about it. How do I communicate to my team when they're not in the office?
Yeah.
So there could be some of that. But I think some of it is like The Daily Chicken is a podcast done by Clay Grove's kids where they interview their chickens and tell chicken jokes to chickens. It's called The Daily Chicken. It's absolutely hilarious. It's super quick. Yeah. And I just listened to one called Geek. Oh, they were just on the podcast rodeo show. I want to say something like Geekology 101 or something like that. So adorable. It's a dad. And this is something that I was like, here's why this show works. It's great if your show works on multiple levels. And so in this case, you have a dad who is like geek, like way, way into Batman. Right. And so he's got his son there and they talk about books and, culture and society kind of things. But this episode, they were interviewing each other, asking like, who is your favorite superhero? Who's your favorite villain? And the kid is all of maybe 7.
Yeah.
And I just heard it and was like, my heart's just going through. I'm like, because in about 15 years, when that kid's like pushing 30 and dad's pushing, 60, 70, whatever it is, they're going to listen back to that and just cry and play to the grandkids and that whole 9 yards. So, and I don't know if that was inspired by, hey, the kids are home, let's do something. And I don't want to try to do new math anymore. Let's do something fun and that'll kill some time. And I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Miss Eileen says in the chat room, she says, I think podcasters are creating second and third podcasts with their less geeky friends. And in this case, with their children. And so I think not all of them, but I think some of them are in that same boat. I'd agree with Miss Eileen to say, I think we do have podcasters creating second ones. And then we do have podcasters creating them with their children and doing children's projects. And they're thinking, hey, just throw this on Anchor. It's free. If it sticks, awesome. If it doesn't, like that chicken podcast that you just said to me.
Yeah.
When you first mentioned that, I'm like, not in a million years would I ever listen to that. And then, you're like, no, it's super funny. And so who would have thought a podcast talking to your chickens and telling chicken jokes to the chickens would be funny? Well, you don't know that unless you try. Would they try if it wasn't easy?
Do you know Clay Groves at all?
Just the name.
We're going to play a little Daily Chicken. Here's episode 12. How do you wake up a chicken? Courtesy from my friends at Spotify.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Chicken, where every day we tell chickens jokes about chickens. I'm Sammy, and today's joke came from my Aunt Terry. How do chickens wake up in the morning? With an alarm clock. Thanks for listening to the Daily Chicken. For more fun, visit dailychickenpodcast.com.
Excellent.
The voice work on that is really good.
Yeah.
Like, she is good. How old is she? 9? 10?
Yeah, they're both. I think one is 10 and one is 7-ish.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's celebrate. There's some great voice work there. She does very, very well.
That's the thing I'm going to wait to see, because I've seen Elsie's kids do this. Ivy Envy, Corey Finneran's kids have like, you walk in like, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're playing Podcaster. Like, what? Yeah, we're playing podcasting.
Right.
And so these people, like, I just got a new client, and she's amazing because she was on Blog Talk Radio forever. And she's one of these, again, self-proclaimed, me and technology are not friends. And I finally got her to jump in. And it's fun when you get somebody to come that way. But now it's the opposite. You're having kids grow up who by nature, kids have no fear. And so now they're getting used to this, and they're going to have some that work and some that fail. And so they're going to get that whole, oh yeah, I failed 3 times, but this one sounds like it might work, and let's try it again.
Yeah, no, right on. Somebody said in the chat room that, Anchor's a good sandbox for that.
It is.
Right. And it's just a great opportunity to go out and try some things, see what sticks, see how people pick up and consume. So, I'm a little more in favor of it in a lot of ways. Just because the good stuff will filter its way to the top.
Yeah.
And, the stuff that doesn't work will eventually just go away. We have to find a better way of allowing podcasters to turn off their podcasts. Or have some kind of thing that eventually, I think, eliminates them out of the system. So they're not, 10 years from now, we're not finding podcasts that were done 3 times and they're terrible. Hey, is this thing on? Hello?
Yeah.
Is this thing on?
Can you hear me? Are you good?
Are we on yet? Did you hit record?
No, we can't. Turn your headphones on. What? Yeah. So that's always going to be fun. That would be great. That would be a great feature for Anchor, to have a checkbox that says, this podcast is done or complete or something, some way to trigger it. Cause I know there's a thing there's a tag for that in Apple that says basically, but the complete tag, all that does is stops Apple from seeing if there's new episodes. We need one that's like, please delete this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I think you can. I think you can delete it. Just people won't. They just kind of forget about it, and it's too much work to go back and shut it off. I think we have to do a better job on search of being more relevant and finding, Google, when Google crawls for their crawler, they do a lot of things to check links and backlinks and how much content's being made, and is it real content? And they weight all these things. I'm not sure that same attention is being given to podcasts. In other words, how long has it been out? Has there been an episode recently?
Yeah.
Are people actually listening to it? Where is it getting downloaded? Some of those kinds of things. And that's a really hard problem because the podcasting space is so diverse. I have a podcast on Apple, but I also post it into 7 different podcast players, and so it makes it complicated. Go ahead and throw that comment.
This is what I was looking for. Jeremy says, I've been recording weekly, he says in quotation marks, podcasts on YouTube with my 5-year-old to share his art with family. We're in separate states from all our family, and it helps them to see the grandkid more. That's really cool. When I was in a band before Facebook, and I would take pictures of the audience, and I had one guy come up and he goes, hey, can you take a picture of me with my glasses on? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Thanks for coming to the show. He's like, okay. He goes, yeah, I want my sister to see my new glasses. She's in Florida. Mm-hmm. And so people were using the Sugar Daddy's website as a way to communicate. Mm-hmm. So why not? Dan has a great point about be great if Anchor could do this. Some services, Telegram, have an option to automatically delete your account if it's inactive for a set period of time. Default is 6 months. And I totally agree with that, except for S-Town. Mm-hmm. S-Town is 7 episodes, I think, if I remember right. and it was supposed to be 7. They did their 7, and it will always, it had a start, middle, beginning, and end, and they're like, we're not doing anymore, but it's a podcast, and I would listen. It was a good show.
We go on Netflix and we watch television. We watch Brady Bunch from the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And so, do we necessarily want to be the vault police on these?
Yeah.
This is the thing. Like, should we? Okay, so I make a podcast. I make it for a year. I'm done. I leave it out there. Who gives me the right to be the police on that? To say no, after 2 years it should be gone.
You're gone.
Maybe it's really good, and maybe it should be there forever. And so I see the other side of the equation, which is like, let's just leave them out there. But let's, as we, this, we always say we have a discovery problem. Not that we have a discovery problem, but we have challenges in discovery that need to be addressed.
Yeah, Daniel from the Audacity to Podcast says, then give podcasters a switch. Keep the show active or have it removed. That would be, the problem is when you think about it, how many of these shows even realize they quit? Like, you know what I mean? They're like,
Right,
oh, I did a couple
right,
episodes, and then they're
right.
like, oh, look at this new shiny thing.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to have that option.
Well, we know these hosts aren't going to stay around forever. Like, I mean, okay, maybe Libsyn will, but maybe they won't. Like, maybe the industry will flip and change and whatever, or Anchor at some point will change and they won't host anymore.
Or
and those files,
there's enough idea.
yeah, and those files will become they'll be gone. They'll get deleted. And then of course that breaks Apple, and Apple removes it, and we're in business. So there may be natural attrition that happens that eliminates these things. That takes a lot longer. Yeah.
For those that forget, Podshow / Mevio lasted 116 months. They went through $38.8 million. Podango lasted 27 months. Wildvoice.com lasted 36 months. MyPodcast.com was 48 months. Audiometric.io, which had a really cool dynamic ad insertion, they lasted 24 months or 21 months before they were purchased by Panoply. Whatever happened to Panoply? Are they? I'm assuming they're still around.
Yeah, I don't know.
Opinion Podcasting lasted 23 months. Zcat lasted 36 months. And I remember right, Zcat was the one that had one really popular show, and it ruined them. It was like, we're running out of, like, we have to pay for their bandwidth. And it was like, oh, but hosting podcasts it's so cheap. That's why it's free. And I'm like, until you get a lot of people,
Yeah, but we have to remember Anchor is backed by a pretty big sugar daddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's why I said that's going to be a fun one to watch.
Right.
And now they've added, they just added a feature where they'll somehow convert your MP4 file from Zoom to a podcast. Yeah, so now we can hear all those people going, can you turn your headphones on?
Don't use Zoom, people. Yeah. Don't use Zoom unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah.
Friends don't let friends use Zoom.
I've never heard of this. I just picked up Soundwise lifetime deal on AppSumo and started tinkering. Seems good for sharing private internal audio programs or a smaller audience. Never heard of it. I'll have to check it out. There are new things coming out on a regular basis. Here we go. Panoply abandoned ship on content. I remember that. I think they just went into like the tech side of it because they had audiometric.io, which I was so bummed. That was a really cool. I had a show on there, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're going to grandfather you in, even though we just got bought. And then all of a sudden I just couldn't log in anymore.
Yeah. Well, so think about all those shows that were on these platforms that are now gone. Those shows are gone too. So that's natural attrition. I think if we're going to talk about removing podcasts, I think that's how it gets done. If you're on a Libsyn or a Blueberry or Spreaker or whatever, you have to keep paying or your shows go away. And so, I think that's, in my opinion, that's good enough. I think we spend too much time thinking about
the trash.
The trash.
The litter.
Just let it be. It's part of the chaos. And I think it's kind of good that it's out there in a lot of ways. It's giving, because if people don't get an opportunity to try, we don't get really good, unique new things, right? John Lee Dumas had not tried the daily concept.
Yeah.
Would it have become as popular as it did? And looking back, it's easy to say, well, maybe we shouldn't have had that to begin with, but it's been, no. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like we needed those kind of genres. If we didn't have a serial, we wouldn't have all these true crime podcasts.
Yeah.
Your opinion, whether you like them or not, that's not what's important. The fact is we have them and they're great and they're great opportunities. This daily chicken, like that's not something, I mean, those kinds of things need to come to the surface. So we need that churn and we need to focus on the best of what comes out of that churn and stop worrying about what falls to the bottom of the pot.
And another great anchor show is this one. It's called Fat, 50 and Frisky. Let me play an episode.
Isn't that
here.
all of us?
Yeah. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Well, you got to check out, anchor.fm. It's the one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. And it's 100%. Which, of course, every anchor show starts with an anchor ad. Mm-hmm. That guy somewhat sounds familiar. I don't know, just a little.
Yeah, I wonder who
so that
is.
means, you're getting paid to. It's Carl Spackler. It says right here, hosted by Carl Spackler. And you have to be a Caddyshack fan to get that. Yeah. But that's my test show on Anchor. And so far I'm up to $1.85 on the Fat 50 and Frisky show.
But Dave, you throw a show out with very little support.
Yeah. I'm doing a show like every other show I hear on Anchor where I just fire it up and start talking. I'm doing an Anchor show. And for the fun part is the early episodes, I try to make Carl the direct opposite of like anything I would ever say. Like Carl was really into babysitter porn for a while. And I was like, this is wrong. So let's talk about things that are wrong. So
we're gonna beep that part out.
So
the produce show.
Anyway, I did have a question. I'm seeing this a lot in the Facebook groups, and I think people are overthinking this a little bit. And the one guy, I wasn't like being nasty. I just said, what have you done so far? So this was from a guy named Letif, Letif. He says, since marketing was brought up in a recent post, let me ask, who has a music podcast and how do you market that effectively? And again, I kind of want to go, it all boils down to know who your audience is, know what they want, give it to them, go to where they are, make friends with them, and tell them about your show. So if we weren't quarantined, Danny Pena used to go, he has a show, Gamertag Radio. And when a new game would come out and you would line up at, Game Exchange or insert, hot gaming, whatever game hobby shop thing. And like, you can pick it up Tuesday at midnight and there'd be a big line out front. Well, Danny went down with a tape recorder and business cards and said, I do a show about games. And then he'd ask them like, what's your favorite game, and interview them. And that works really, really well because people are vain. And if they know they're going to be on a podcast, they'll go over there and listen to it. Yeah. I used to do that with my band. I talked about taking pictures. I would take pictures of people at the gig, throw them on my website, and then they would go to see it. Cause back then being on the internet was like a big deal. Again, pre-Facebook, and people were like, wow, check it out, I'm on the internet. So to me, if I was doing a music show, I would say, okay, well, who's my target audience? Well, it's electric blues. Okay. So let's go to, the next time Kenny Wayne Shepherd's in town, let's go out in the parking lot if I'm not going to the show anyway, and just hand out business cards and talk to the guy next to you. Jim, anything else you can think of? I mean, it always seems like it kind of boils down to that. And I hate to oversimplify it.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I've had success, and I think it's a bunch of different things. It's not one thing. You got to try something. You got to try a bunch of things, see what works, work those for a while, and then keep working. Like, so we just had a couple of weeks ago, we just had this company called Unraid on our show, and they make some software that you can run NAS, a NAS device for storage and stuff. It's terribly geeky, right? It's really nerdy, but it came from our audience. Like, this was an audience, and actually this was an audience recommendation 10 years ago that we had made a relationship with them early, and then it kind of dropped off, and they came back and then kind of dropped off, and they're back again. And so we've had them on the show a couple times. Well, this most recent show that I did with them a few weeks ago, it just has gone bananas. Like, mostly because their marketing guy, Spencer, put it everywhere. Like, he tweeted it. He put it in the newsletter. We ended up on the front page of their website. Like, nice. I had friends sending me like, hey, I saw this, I saw this on their website. What the heck's going on? Right. And so we hit this vein of activity with it, and it's been really, really, really successful. I've done that with other vendors, and it just didn't work for whatever reason. The things didn't happen.
Yeah.
We did a little contest. We're like, hey, send us pictures of your Unraid rigs and tag us on them on Twitter, and we'll give you the little badge, for doing that. We had a whole bunch of people do that. I mean, so I think you've got to continually always be ABM, right? Always be marketing, and you have to just kind of go with what's currently working. We had no idea, Dave, that this pour, I should probably mention it because we're halfway through the show. Today's pour sponsored by Mark over there at where's Mark at? Where do we find Mark?
Podcastbranding.co.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for the sponsorship. So we had no idea that would become a thing. Like when we first started doing it, and I said, hey, maybe we got to get an advertiser for it. You just gotta, those kinds of things kind of rise to the surface, and then you grab them and run hard, because they may not last forever.
Yeah. Carrie has a great point, and this is true. She goes, I've wanted to do something like this for her Key West perspective, but haven't been brave enough to ask random visitors I see walking around town. It is easier said than done. I went to the mall once, back when there were people at the mall, and I was going to ask them.
Water malls?
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to ask, do you listen to podcasts? And if so, what's your favorite? And I was there with a microphone and walked by all sorts of people. And I think I talked to 3 people. Yeah. And I couldn't, because I always tell people, and they don't believe me, in the inner Dave is a shy person. Right. And I just couldn't, it was awkward. And I actually, the people I talked to were fine about it, but it was like,
I did that at a race. We were at we were down in Kansas City at a running race, back when I used to run a lot. And I thought I was podcasting about fitness and tech. And I thought, well, I go to a race, I'll just interview people. So I had a microphone and a thing, and I tried to go around, and people like literally ran away from me. They did not want to be interviewed. They did not want to talk it through. It was awful. I mean, I felt, and I'm an extrovert, and I felt bad at the end of the day. I thought that was a total failure. So it's hard to do. You're going to get a lot of rejection on that.
I had fun. I was doing a podcast for a local music event called Rockin' on the River. And I did their website. I said, I'm going to start a podcast. And I went down with a microphone, and you've got like hammered people, like not tipsy, hammered people were the only people I could get to talk on a microphone. And many of them ran away. It's that whole fear of speaking in public, but who's not afraid to, go ahead.
Real quick, Brandon had said, well, it was a race. Well, but in the race setting, you stand in line for about 30 minutes. And I thought that was going to be an awesome opportunity to do it. But we do have an awesome opportunity. I'll make the transition for you, for our awesome subscribers. So
yeah, you know who I would race to talk to? That's right. My awesome supporters. If you want to be an awesome supporter, super easy. Go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. The Teacher's Pet still available. If you need, if you want some one-on-one consulting at a discounted rate, that is one of the options. I did notice on the page, you have to click on show more options to see that. So it's somewhat hidden there. But we want to thank our $20 supporters every week. And those are awesome people like Greg at shepherd.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at horseradionetwork.com. Josh Rivers, the Podcast Guy Media. Find him at podcastguymedia.com. Max Trescott up in the air at aviationnewstalk.com. And I have news about, I'm not going to go there. Anyway, moving on. Shane at spybrary.com. Because Max, I can't say it. Anyway, okay. Shut up, Dave.
Keep going.
Carl White does Life in the Carolinas podcast.com. And once we're allowed out, and you want to go the Carolinas. Have you ever been to the Carolinas, Jim?
I have not. No, I need to. They're beautiful.
I've had a few friends that have moved down there. It's great. Kim Craggy over at Toastmasters101.net. So if you want to get your Toastmaster on, there you go. And of course, and I still haven't updated the slide.
That's right. I'm getting good run on it for Home Gadget Geeks for $4.19 every week for free. Thanks, Dave.
Ed Sullivan over at soniccupcake.com. So if you're looking for an audio editor, Ed can make you sound really good.
Maybe that's for being the newest $20 subscriber.
That's it.
That's what you get. You get this
little,
spot.
Yeah, you get a little, get a little music. Yeah. So, but if you want to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And it helps keeps the lights on. It helps pays Dave's tax bill. It does all sorts of great things. So thanks so much for our awesome supporters. And I had another question that we wanted to, just a, well, here, this is this is a good one for the second half. There is let me throw this in the chat room. It's the 80-20 rule. And what it is, he said, sharing his screen, the question is, what should I spend more time on? Should I spend more time making content, or should I spend more time promoting my show? And so this is from a guy named Derek Sivers. It's at socialtriggers.com, who's interesting because he basically announced, I think he had a kid, and he on the front page, he's like, hey, I quit. I'm done. But he's got all these old blog posts, and he's saying, it's smarter to find another 10,000 people to consume what you've already created as opposed to creating more. In other words, create content 20% of the time and spend the other 80% of the time promoting what you created. And I was like, that's an interesting idea.
Well, I think it's not either or, it's both and. I think at different times in your podcast, you've got to do things differently. Like there are times when it's growth time, and you just got to go, like, you have some opportunities to just grow numbers. This Unraid show that I talked about earlier did bring a bunch of new listeners to us. All of a sudden, I had this opportunity to engage with a whole bunch of new people. They drove them to our Discord site. They referenced the web page. We just had people showing up that I'd never seen before. Well, that's not a time to start focusing on content. That's a time to start focusing on listeners.
Right.
And so when you have new listeners, so we reached out to all of them individually, and we welcomed to the team, and we started trying to come up with some subjects that would engage them. We wanted to keep them around, right? We wanted to give them some reasons to stay. I could, and maybe making more content in that case is the way to do that. But for us, it was engaging them in the social space. So I think when those kinds of things happen, you have to do that. And then there are times when you just need to buckle down and actually create good content and focus on it. And so I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. What do you think?
Yeah, that's to me, because especially now, like my main way of promoting myself was getting on other shows and going to live events.
Yeah.
And it's like both have gone. Now my numbers haven't really dipped. They dipped at the very beginning of April because of the whole pandemic thing.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really looked to see if they've.
Are you not getting as many interviews as you had before?
It
seems like, you do a good job of getting interviewed on other people's shows. You do that really
probably
well.
It's about the same. Yeah, I think I've done. What happens is I do interviews and then they never come out. That's the new thing I'm doing now. Is you have these people like, oh, I want to have 57 shows in the can. And so they interview you and they're like, yeah, this will be out in 6 months. You're like, wait, what? Like, huh? And so I'm now starting to nudge them. Like, I'll put in my to-do list, like, hey, this guy said it was going to be out on this date. And if I haven't gotten a thing that said, hey, Dave, here's your show, it's live, to go back and say, what happened to the show? Because, I gave you an hour and a half of my time and it's not here. It's like, So so yeah, what I've been doing is web. It's funny. I've been doing what everybody else is doing, is focusing on the little things that you normally don't focus on.
Yeah.
I had somebody yesterday and I was like, wow, their show played on Apple Podcasts. Their show played on iTunes. It played on their website. Their audio was fine. Their feed was fine. But for whatever reason, on Apple Podcasts, on Apple TV, their file wouldn't play. And in the end, we kind of went, we might have to go ask Apple on this one, because there was no technical reason why it wouldn't. But I thought about it, that she was spending a lot of time focusing on this thing that brings her, if that much traffic. And it was like, that might be well spent focusing on your audience than focusing on where your audience isn't, unless I could be wrong, but I don't get hardly anything. Of course, I don't get anything from Spotify either. Spotify is a really small part of my audience, and some people are just crushing it on that. So
I think it just depends on your genre, where you started, where you're speaking into the audience. Throw Dave's comment up there really quick. Define a day in the life of buckling down and creating good content. I think, let me give you an example. And I think for everybody it's different, but for podcasters, I think this is especially for podcasters who podcast about podcasting. Creating, I get asked all the time, especially during this time, like, hey, what kind of microphone should I get? What kind of camera? I mean, that question has amped up to almost daily for people, right? And so buckling down for me would be sitting down and defining creating a microphone post, creating a camera post, creating a lighting post, creating a production post, and structuring those very well so they all interact with each other, right? So there's links, there's cross links. People can find one from the other. Hey, by the way, a camera in your mic post, a camera is important. We've covered this over here, and that coming back to that camera post. And really spending some time on creating something you would be proud to send somebody to when they give you those questions. And then maybe even to Kim's point on my about page from a couple weeks ago, maybe making some videos about those too. So those pages are led off with the video. All that stuff takes time. And I think sometimes when we're in the rush to create content, we don't do a great job of optimizing it for the other pages around it. And so, Dave, when I talk about buckling down, I'm talking about really cranking out some time, because all that stuff takes time and coordination. You're just not sitting down, typing it out, throwing a few links and vomiting it on your site, right? You really need to spend some time thinking about, how does this all coordinate with each other? How does this all work? How is this all branded? And so I think that is an example of buckling down and spending some time planning and thinking about, what do I want to do with this more than just vomiting things out into the internet. How are we planning around it?
Yeah. What I did at the School of Podcasting is I started to go through trying to look at it from the eyes of a brand new podcaster. Mm-hmm. And I realized I had one tutorial in there that was really like, it wasn't even 16:9. And I don't know how that's been in there, and I didn't find it, but I redid it because it was a little blurry compared to the other ones. Redid that. And this weekend, I am throwing out my how to build your website in WordPress course, basically, is my plan. And because WordPress is one of those things that it can be 800 million different things. Yeah. And I'm going to say, this is what I recommend. Like, this is like, and I'm going to have a couple. Like, if you want super simple, check out Podpage. If you want something a little more, check out podcastpage.io, I think is the new one. If you want total flexibility, check out check out Second Line Themes with Elementor. And that's like option. And then of course, option one, I guess, could be, here's how to pimp out a Libsyn site. There's Blueberry as websites, things like that. Because it's just right now, you walk in there and it's like a bad Facebook group. There's like, well, you could use GeneratePress, or you could use this, or you could use this. And I'm like, I need to go, here's how you do it. And it was one of those things that I've kind of, I don't know how, but I walked in there and I'm like, wow, this is a mess. I was like, all right, this needs redone. So
yeah, and I think kind of deciding how you're going to interact with your audience, especially if you're going to advertise to this. And by the way, affiliate links are a form of advertising, right? Mm-hmm. That's the way it works. And to know that if your advertising funnel is going to be just traditional ads or commercials, you don't have to do a lot. The goal on that is to drive as many people to your site as you can. It's just numbers, right? Yeah. It's the numbers that are important. But if you're going to do affiliate and those affiliate pieces, you're actually more benefited if you interact with them and give them that link, or interact with them on that page and say, here's where you go. Here's what you need to do. People kind of need to be told, Dave, what to do. Use my affiliate link. You're pretty good at doing this. You say SOP free, right? When you're talking about service, you need to guide people to that affiliate link. You can't just rely on the top of the funnel to bring them in. It will work sometimes, but the more you can interact. So if you're going to do affiliate ads, if you're going to do affiliate relationships, I think you have to be more engaged with your audience to guide them to those links to make sure those things happen. So a difference in the style of the marketing.
Yeah. Dave says, sounds like for Jim, buckling down is being thoughtful, intentional about the experience that we're creating from our audience perspective. Yep.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be. Yeah.
It really, it's one of those things that's kind of I swear, the more people, when I look at people that are super successful, it's people who really know their audience. And I know that's kind of like, well, yeah, because that then helps you because otherwise you're making content that your audience doesn't want. Carrie says, I've been in the process of creating an email sequence for my personal branding clients. Yeah. Helpful tips, tools. One thing you might try with Carrie, and going back to her Key West perspective show, is there like a favorite shop, like a favorite local shop in Key West that you love, and it just oozes Key Westness? Maybe go to them and say, hey, I do a show about Key West. Would you be interested in sponsoring it and maybe making a little display here in the store? And for that little display and maybe business cards with, blah, 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 I'll mention your show here. And then, we'll do this for a month or two, and then we'll see how it works. Maybe if you want, there's, if you have a sale or something that you can prove that you're driving traffic to the store. And then likewise, you're getting, you're right there in your target audience, and they could say, hey, thanks so much. Can you, drop a business card in the bag with every order, something like that. Because one of the things that Lee Silverstein did great with his We Have Cancer shows, he's partnered with people that have like, who can I amplify their mission, and how can they amplify my mission? We work together. So that might be an idea for a local show. Find a local place to do that. Or I always thought there was a guy. This is Ramsbottom. Can you sound more British than Ramsbottom? I love that. And I told him he should make stickers when he interviews local businesses to say, as featured on, this is Ramsbottom, or this is Ram, or he has some sort of cute name for it. But for local stuff, that might be an option of just partnering with people.
Dave, a lot of folks listen to us, this show, because of our relationship, like, because we enjoy spending time with each other, and we've done it every Saturday for the last 5 years. We like each other. That's comfortable. People find that comfortable. They come out on Saturdays. It's a comfortable place to land. I think sometimes too, with our sponsors, our promoters, whoever we're promoting, however we're doing that, right? Those relationships, and it might be even the listeners that we're trying to promote. People like it and are more inclined to respond to it when those relationships are comfortable too. Like if it's just a brand new sponsor, they're probably not going to respond to it right away. There needs to be some longevity to it, and some interaction with it, and some where it gets really, really, really comfortable. And that's really the sweet spot of where those relationships start to work, when they've been there a while and they feel comfortable. It's not I'm just not saying, I've been promoting HelloFresh on our show. I don't get it. It's an affiliate thing. I could get money from it if I needed to, but I'm really comfortable with it. And at the end of the show last week, so Thursday's show, we were talking. Well, I'll talk about that at the end of the show. But at the end of the program, one of the hosts, or one of the guests I had on, said, we got to the end and I closed it up, and he goes, "You forgot to do the HelloFresh ad." And I was like, "No, I didn't. It's not an ad, and I just didn't do it." But the fact that, here's a listener, an avid listener who forgot, that's, man, you've connected at that point if your listeners are saying you forgot to do it.
When Ray Ortega was on the road with God Save the Pod Save the Queen, I think that was the name of the show, if I remember right. He was on the road. He was their live sound guy.
Great title,
and,
by the way.
And people would shout out ads like, "Do Blue Apron,
right?
Come on, Squarespace,"
Yeah.
because they always made them fun and things like that.
Good relationship.
Mystic Max says here, I asked friends for advice. That is a great place to start. Go one level next, and this is we go back to being shy. If you can find people that aren't your friends and family. Because you need somebody, and you need to tell them, I want you to listen to this and talk about it like I'm not in the room, because you really need to figure out if it's good or not. There was an article, I can't find it now, but it was somebody that explained how they got into, top rankings of iTunes and blah, 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 blah. And where did they start? They got a focus group. And again, I'm obsessed with that idea, but it was like, he got feedback and was like, okay, because there's, everybody's talking about how do I market this show? And I'm like, have we guaranteed that it's good yet? Because, I'll be the first to say, the Biggest Loser podcast is not a good podcast. It sounds like somebody took about 10 minutes, watched an episode, and turned on a microphone, because that's exactly what it is. There's no, so if you can get somebody, preferably somebody who is your target audience, because I've had people come on the Podcast Rodeo show and they'll send a fictional story, like with storytelling and sound effects. That is just not my thing. It's just, unless the story moves along really quick, but a lot of times they're building the back character, and a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot. I don't listen to a lot of them, but most of them they're really into, which is good, the theater of the mind, the sound effects and the things like that. But in the end, like the story is really what, that's the icing on the cake. But like, what's the story and how does it move? And do I really need to hear all this stuff kind of thing? And that's where I just get a little too impatient. And so they say, hey, it's my friends will tell me if it's not good. Well, I hope so. Because a lot of them are like your mom will always tell you it's great, honey. I love it. What's a podcast?
Maybe she'll be honest. Maybe she's like, oh, that's so nice, but it's not very good.
Yeah, honey, you don't want to put that out. People are going to make fun of you.
This. I don't like that. It is interesting though. Be careful on feedback that you might be doing something new that is making people uncomfortable, but maybe the key to your success. So if it feels good to you, reconsider when you get that negative feedback. Like, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying spend some time thinking about, like, as an example, on my show on Home Gadget Geeks, we always talk about the weather in the first 5 minutes. It's just what we do. It's my thing. I'm a weather nerd. I have a tweet every day that goes out that tweets the weather here in Omaha. I've gotten tons of engagement around it. The audience gets really freaked out when I don't talk about the weather. Like, they're like, whoa, you missed that spot, right? When I first started doing that, like, really? And I'm like, yeah, really, that's, and if I'd have listened to him, we'd have cut that part out and it would have been an engagement piece that we would have missed on. So Dave, I'm not always 100% sure negative advice or constructive criticism about your podcast is always right.
Well, it has to be. I'll give you an example. The Podcast Rodeo Show is a show I do to provide a first impression. The whole goal of that show is it's quick, it's simple, I'm in and I'm out. And somebody had a great suggestion, and they said, what we ought to do? Whoever you reviewed last should come on as a guest host, like a co-host, to review the next one. So it's not just your opinion. And I was like, man, I really like that idea.
That is a great idea.
Except it steers that podcast away from my goal, which is to do a show super quick, in and out. Because now I've got scheduling. I've got it makes that show from super simple to kind of complicated. And I was like, but I do like that idea. It'd be great. And if I only did one show, I would jump all over that.
Yeah. And maybe they're not on the show. Maybe they're not on the show. Maybe they get to submit an audio snippet.
I thought about that.
Maybe you can make that easier that way.
Yeah. So, so there are times when people will give you feedback and you're like, that's a really good idea, but that's not the nature of the show.
Yeah. And Brandon says if 10 people complain about the same thing, you may want to take notice though. Yeah, exactly. No, you might, if it's a big complaint, unless it's not your target audience. Well, I did church. I was a contemporary band, I was in a contemporary band in a very traditional church that was trying to make the change, and all the old people complained about the music. And the pastor was like, you cannot listen to that. We are moving in a new direction. Right. And so sometimes you just got to go against the grain. But yeah, Brandon, no, you're right. There are times you need to take it as well.
Yeah. I just got this new client. She's awesome. And I was reading her iTunes reviews, and more than one said she mentions all the time that she's an expert. And in talking to her for an hour, she mentioned 3 times that she's an expert. And so I was thinking about that today in the shower. I'm like, I need to bring that up to her in a loving, awkward manner and go, hey, just so you know, that's the second time you've told me in the same conversation that you're an expert in this area. Yeah. And that gets a little weird when it's a podcast. It makes it sound like you're maybe a bit of an egomaniac or things like that. It's not a good look. Let's go that route. So
yeah. No, for sure. Man, that hour goes fast, Dave.
It is super. Wow. Holy cow. That's ridiculous.
I know. Just flies by. It's a good thing we have the post show.
That is the exactly. What is coming up on the average guy.tv?
Yeah, we had a little panel discussion around how this pandemic, COVID-19, has kind of changed education. And
Yeah,
so
with Chris Nessie in the gang.
Unfortunately, Chris's power was out that night, so he couldn't get Chris. But I had two other guests on to talk about that. We're going to have Chris on in a couple of weeks to kind of help make up for that, and he'll get the whole show. So it'll be posted later this weekend, theaverageguy.tv.
Nice. This week, I'm going to play an interview with a guy from Podit, which is a place where you can get guests, and it's a little more than some of the other services out there. And I brought him on because I had people say, there are all these services coming out there. Are they any good? And I was like, well, maybe I should start interviewing these people and not do a super long, in-depth, like, what is the story? How did you get involved? Like, what made you want to be a coder? But like, what is this thing? Who should use it? What does it do? What's the benefit? That kind of thing. So they're going to be kind of short, sweet. I've got Karen Yankovic coming up on how to use LinkedIn, a couple other things. Then I'll be reviewing Podpage and podcastpage.io. That's not confusing at all. So that's coming up on the future here. But I think this week we're going to do the Podit interview. And everybody else, again, as always, thanks. Jim, we have 34 people watching us right now.
It's pretty great.
That just makes me go, really? Seriously?
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I know. I appreciate them all.
But thanks to the chat room. Thanks to our awesome supporters. Go to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. Thanks to Mark from podcastbranding.co. And everybody else, stick around for some post show. Because Jim, what do we want to talk about in the post show?
Actually, we got a few technical questions in the chat room we can get to right away. So we'll cover those right after we end this.
Yeah, we'll get our tech on right after this. And we're back.
I wish they gave me control to bring the chat room questions in. That'd be handy for you,
Yeah.
Load those up. I think Kenny had asked, does anybody know when the new Rodecaster Pro firmware is coming out? Not the beta.
That I don't know. They were really transparent about that. They said, hey, guys, we're going to bring you in and you get to find the bugs. And when the bugs are gone, we're going to release it. And I was like, well, that's kind of different. So I don't know if they've given us a date. They do have some goodies coming out, some accessories. I don't know what they are exactly for the Rodecaster. I just know I got an email from them and said, would you be interested in playing with the goodies? And I was like, yeah, I love goodies. We got some best wishes here.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know about you guys, man. I'm very happy to be in May.
Yeah, that's for sure. Jamin had asked a question that's Libsyn specific. Hey, Dave, do I need to fill out all the info under network app listings on Libsyn for each show? No, you can ignore that. Okay. Pretty much. There's a network app, depending on what plan you are, and this is one of the things I wish they would kind of like pull back. The network app you're in automatically. That's I even forget the name of it. Podcast Source. It's an app that has every Libsyn podcast in it. But, people use Apple and Overcast and Google Plus, but it's there. Then you have a link to the Google app, the iOS app, and I think maybe still a Microsoft app. I don't think that's still in there. But anyway, you have those links. Those are only put into play if you're using Libsyn to make you a custom app. So that's one of those where I'm like, can we get those out of the dashboard if you're not using it? But if you're on the $20 plan, they're already there because you can take that step. And I'm like, can we have those show up when they take the step? I think it's there to kind of like, hey, what are those? And then we go, oh, you can have your own custom app. It's $10 a month and things like that. And Mr. Bits is come in to join us. Okay.
Oh, do we have another question before we jump?
Yeah, one more. Brandon had asked, by the way, Brandon to come over and listen to Home Gadget Geeks on Thursday. So it's great to have a little crossover with him. Ooh. Rodecaster Pro versus Zoom 8, L8. I've got stimulus money that's burning a hole in my pocket.
Yeah. I've seen I've watched 3 or 4 videos on this. And for me, you can't beat the Rodecaster for podcasting. No. If I was doing live music and other things, I'd go maybe a little more L8. I think there's definitely a deeper learning curve on the L8.
What's the price difference? Do you know?
I don't. I know I would guess the L8's a little cheaper, maybe by $100, but it does some interesting things. And once you get, because the L8's different, it's just got a different, it looks like a mixer, but it's different. You push a button and it's got some cool stuff, but to me, and I don't know if that's just a case of you always love the first one you use.
It's Zoom's answer to the Rodecaster Pro, right?
Yeah,
but it's similar kind of device.
It is, but this is really geared for podcasting. That is geared for podcasting, or if you want to do live music. And I'm like,
yeah, Bang says 400 for the L8, 600 for the Rodecaster. So
yeah,
okay, yeah.
So, but
bring him in.
Speaking of Mr. Bits, how are you, my friend?
Pretty darn good. I'm experimenting with something right now. I was just curious if it was working or how well it's working. But beyond that, question for you. Have you noticed how many podcasts have been mentioned in major news articles over the past several months this year? Partially because the politicians can't get out and shake the hands and kiss the babies, so they're putting out their own podcasts.
You're getting really quiet all of a sudden.
Well, that's probably based on what I'm doing. How's this?
That's really even quieter.
Okay, that answers this question.
And you're distorted. Other than that, it's great.
it got like progressively worse. Yeah. You still there?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Okay. I think while he figures it out, I think it's a really good question. I think like during these times, podcasting has gotten a little bit more, and he's right. I mean, man, if I was a politician, I just created my own podcast. Like, why wouldn't I talk to my people that way? Why would I not try to talk to the district that way? I'm getting notes from school districts who want us all of a sudden start going, hey, how do we talk to the parents? It didn't matter. It didn't matter 4 months ago. It matters now. So I am seeing an increase in that. Are you seeing? I haven't been reading mainstream news very much, so I'm probably a bad example on that. But Dave, have you seen any difference there?
No, I just keep seeing it pop up in mainstream TV shows. Like The Good Place had a thing where they were talking about blah, blah, blah. And I got to get back to my podcast. The Blacklist had a thing where the main character was like, hey, I'm, Elizabeth, it's so great to see you. I was listening to a podcast. And then, so it just were 5 years ago, they would never say that because nobody knew what they were, or a few people. So, but yeah, so I'll have to keep an eye open for that. I'm always amazed that news sources don't put out their stuff as a podcast, like local news. I'm doing a local news show now. I started a show about Akron, Ohio.
They have advertising problems. See, this is I didn't realize the mainstream has as big of an advertising problem as they do, because they're locked in on certain ways they can and can't advertise based on their current contracts. So now all of a sudden doing this as a podcast, they're struggling with what music struggled with 10 years ago. Was how do we do this in a new alternative way that is different? So they can't just make it a podcast, because in some cases they've agreed with an advertising firm or whatever that content is going to be exclusive to a certain channel, right? So it gets different. I love that. By the way, that question you just had up.
Yeah, we're going to put that. What's the best marketing you've ever seen?
I continue to think the guys at Cigar Authority do it better than anybody. And they're totally non-traditional in the sense, I mean, they're like old school radio. And yet Dave over there at Cigar Authority, I mean, the ads he gets and the niche he's in and the way he does it, it works. I'm not saying you go copy him, but he has figured it out how to work for his niche. I think this is where you got to kind of figure out, okay, in my space with my listeners, where it's working. Apparently for Dave in the cigar space, having 7 ads in a row 3 times in 2 hours, you would think, oh, that doesn't work. It works like crazy.
And they got people lined up.
He does.
Yeah.
That
doesn't work. I don't know if he started it that way. Yeah.
He did start it that way. Yeah, wow. He did. Well, no, he did. He started with no ads and then started doing the show. And then they started offering the spots for a certain amount and he locked them in on a quarterly or an annual basis. And there's some agreements about how they get to do some things on the show and some other stuff like that. Right. But yeah, he just didn't, it's crazy. Sometimes I think we limit ourselves because we think, oh, I could try that, but it's not going to work. Well, did you try it?
Exactly.
Do you know for sure it's not going to work?
I'll give you a clue who I think does the best marketing. Mr. Glenn the Geek.
Oh, for sure.
What he does
For
that
sure.
I think is cool is he does the trick where he went to an event and said, hey, I want to be your official podcast. All you got to do is give me a booth. And they gave him a really crappy booth, but he interviewed all the speakers, which grew his network. Then he grew all the sponsors who said, wait, you do a what? How do I sponsor on that?
Yeah.
That's a great move. Then what he does with sponsors is it's not just a sponsorship, it's a partnership.
Right.
So if somebody has a question about a saddle, he'll bring in the saddle sponsor to answer the question.
Yeah.
So now that audience is building a relationship with Ken the saddle guy or whatever it is.
Well, you better believe I'm going to recommend Mark now for branding. Like, you better believe that because we have a relationship with him. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's actually just because, Mark hasn't had enough plugs today. It's a great episode. Pro Podcast Solutions episode number, which is Daryl Darnell. If you don't know who Pro Podcast Solutions is, Daryl's a great guy. And he started a podcast, which, again, talk about great marketing. He's interviewing his clients, and without making it sound like a giant commercial for Pro Podcast Solutions, these people are explaining how starting a podcast really helped their business. And oh, by the way, if you need an editor, that's what Daryl does. But it's Pro Podcast Solutions /031 is an episode with Mark. And he has some really great tips. If you want to try to design your own artwork, he's got some great stuff on there about, like, why do podcasters put microphones on there? Unless it's a podcast about podcasting, you don't really need a microphone.
You can see here, I don't have one. This is just this is no microphone.
My new pet peeve, it's like, now I've noticed it. Why does everybody put the word podcast? Like, if it's, keeping it young, you don't need podcast. You could say, what's the name of your show? Keeping It Young. Like, I don't say I'm reading the book, War and Peace book. I don't say I'm going to go watch the movie, Gone with the Wind movie. Why is everything, I don't say, what's the name of your show? School of Podcasting podcast. It's just School of Podcasting. But everybody puts the word podcast in their name, which is really bad, because then you rank against every other show that has the word podcast in their name.
And maybe your brand is going to go beyond a podcast.
Yeah.
Right. And so, we don't, Home Gadget Geeks is not I rarely do I say those four terms together, Home Gadget Geeks podcast. I just say Home Gadget Geeks. And that actually we've done back in the day when I was on Home Server Show, we used to do, we do a meetup. And so we had Home Server Show meetup, and we had the home, we would do these, we would brand all these events with the name of the show, but not include the word podcast in it.
Yeah. The, Mark says, I said in that interview, don't use podcast in your title. Yeah. It's just
I think he's
not really
right
needed
on that one. But if you do, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. You'll survive it.
Yeah.
You will, but you will rank if it's physically a part of your title in iTunes. You will join the pool of everybody else who put podcast in their title. Yeah.
I also removed, because my show used to be called The School of Podcasting.
Yep.
And I got rid of the word the, because that messed up my show. Apple search is crap anyway, but I was like, that seemed to help a little bit. And also, don't forget that Apple searches the title of your show, the title of the episode, and the author field. So don't blow off that author field. Are people, like, I could put author Power of Podcasting, except there's one problem. Nobody's going to be searching for Power of Podcasting. They're going to search for Dave Jackson.
Right.
And the other thing I need to fix, because I think it's still on the podcast review show, I think I'm listed as David Jackson. So I had to figure out, because people always ask me, are you Dave or David or Davey? And I'm like,
should you just have both in that author field to make sure you cover both? Should
you know what? I never even thought about that.
Dave Jackson.
Dave Jackson.
Would that be against?
Duh. Why didn't I think of that?
But that wouldn't be keyword stuffing, would it?
No, I don't think so.
Apple wouldn't remove you for including all the versions of your name. Like Dave, what's your middle initial?
A.
So if you did, I didn't know that. Dave A. Jackson.
Oh my.
David Jackson. Jackson.
My grandma told me I was destined for greatness because I was named after King David in the Bible and Andrew Jackson, the president. And then I grow up and I'm like, wow, Andrew Jackson was a giant racist pig. Thanks, Grandma.
Jerk.
Yeah.
He was kind of a jerk, but and you, of course, you would need the Dave Jackson. That should probably be in there as well.
Daniel says it's people knows me as Dave. Yeah, I had to. It was about probably 3 or 4 years, maybe longer than that. And all I did was I went to Google and I typed in David Jackson. And they were like 8,500,000 and blah blah blah. And then I typed in Dave Jackson, and there were like 7 million. And I was like, all right, there's less Daves. Let's go with that one.
So Daniel says that search engines usually search alternative versions of the names and words. But Daniel, in the chat room, would you put both versions of Dave's name? Would you put David Jackson in the author tag? You know more about this than anybody. Yeah. So would you do that? Yes or no? That just sounded like a note you would pass to somebody in 4th grade. Do you like me? Yes or no?
XY, whatever it is.
Okay. Yeah. No. So, and then Daniel, so you would put, in this case, you would put Dave. Daniel, just jump in here.
He's like, I don't have pants on.
Get in here. By the way, don't say I don't have pants on to a bunch of folks in Britain, because in the UK, that means something completely different. You have to say, I don't have trousers.
I don't have trousers on.
Because their pants and our pants are completely different.
Oh,
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's, I just put a link, speaking of SEO. I know this guy knows his stuff. He is putting out a free course, and I'm assuming somewhere he's going to ask us to buy something. But Neil Patel has on YouTube, he's starting a free SEO course.
Neil Patel, isn't that the drummer for Rush?
No, because he's still dead. But too soon. And
what was his name? The drummer for
Neil
Rush?
Peart.
Neil Peart. Okay, there we go.
Or Peart, or I could never figure out how to say his. So anyway, Carrie says here, on that note, I'm helping work on a new wedding show for the vendor network. There you go. Should author really be Key West Wedding Vendor Association rather than me as the host? Ooh. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because Key West is going to get you more, like you would think, people searching for Key West.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're...
Has Daniel showed up yet?
He has not. He might have the little guy.
Couldn't shame him. Yeah, I couldn't shame him into it. Okay. Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
I like that guy.
But that's a good one, I guess. Because, like, for me, I am kind of my brand. So I kind of want, Dave Jackson as the author, where their brand is the whatever it was, Key West Weddings, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, Brandon says, I'm going to search for Key West Weddings. So, he's actually coming.
Yep.
So
yeah, Daniel's coming. Good. Good. We'll save that for him when he gets here.
Yeah. What do you guys say in this podcast or on this podcast? Ooh.
I think you can say either. I think that's splitting hairs.
Yes.
To be honest. I mean, there's a difference. There is a difference for those grammatically challenged. There's a difference there. But I think either for most people listening, for most of the audience, I think you can, whatever is comfortable.
Yeah. Coming to the stage
on this podcast, you would say like what's coming up on this podcast, but what's currently in this podcast.
Well, you know what's currently coming up on this podcast?
Daniel J. Lewis.
And apparently I have on there. I'm like, where's my music? We need, that. We need some applause. The one and only. Exactly. So. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, guys.
How are you?
All right. So the SEO stuff.
Yeah. Help us.
It is okay to include the business name or network name in the author tag. So if, for example, I used to have Noodle Mix Network, that is now retired. So all of our shows would have the host's name or names, and then the network name as well. That's okay. If a business is the creator of the podcast as well, that's okay to put that in there. CBS Studios or something else like that. If, for Dave's shows, multiple shows, if they're all under right now they're under the Power of Podcasting network, you could put Power of Podcasting in part of the author tag as well, because that's the network. That is an author of the show. But what you wouldn't put in there is keywords unless your actual name of whatever business or network includes those keywords.
Yeah, because I used to be Dave Jackson, podcast consultant, start a podcast, and that is all gone away. So Boy, everybody's we're getting into verbiage here.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
Where did brand episode versus podcast, show versus podcast? That is a confusing. Welcome to the lovely world of tech support.
Yeah, I don't think it matters. Daniel, so in Dave's case, should he put Dave Jackson and you'd use a comma in that? So Dave Jackson, comma, David Jackson.
No.
No.
I would not recommend doing that.
Okay. Would you choose the best? Which one comes up quicker in Google in a Google search, or how would he determine whether he goes Dave or David then in there?
What you want to be known as.
Okay.
That's it. Because you introduce yourself as Dave Jackson. So if people are thinking, I want to find Dave Jackson's podcast, they're not going to search for David Jackson. They're going to search for Dave Jackson, since you always introduce yourself as that. And that's how people know you. That's what people are searching for.
I'm not searching for James Collison for theaverageguy.tv.
Right.
Yeah, no, it'd be Jim for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but James, I don't use James hardly at all. And I've noticed, Dave, you do Dave and David quite a bit. You go back and forth between the two.
It's because technically at home I'm David.
Right.
I just picked Dave for like the podcast thing. In fact, it's weird. I have two Facebooks. One is Dave Jackson. That's all my podcasting stuff. And David Jackson, if you ever wondered why I never friended you, if you find that one, it's because that's the one I track up on nieces and nephews and things like that. So, and it says life is too important to be taken seriously. That's the family side. The Dave Jackson on Facebook has all the podcast stuff, and you'll see the graphics and stuff.
Now, on Apple Podcasts, searching for David Jackson does show only your shows that have David Jackson in the author tag.
Yeah, probably some old ones.
Of podcasting. Yeah, Alexa Cast, Feeding My Faith. Shut up, lady in the tube. I just saw her light up.
Yeah, those are old.
And a couple other. Hey, speaking of The Good Place, the podcast actually shows up as a search result for your name. Podcast review show still has David Jackson in it. So
interesting. I need to get those synchronized.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts is not searching the alternative versions of words and names. Google does. And I think with this whole SEO thing, I know people will say, this is what you need to do now. Like a few years ago, 6, 7, 8, I don't remember how long ago, there was that time when Apple Podcasts stopped searching the author tags. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So someone out there gave the advice that, well, since Apple stopped searching the author tags, you need to put your name in the title of your podcast. But Apple didn't intentionally stop. Something broke temporarily. I think it may have only been for a month that it was broken, and they fixed it. And now it's back. And so people were scrambling over themselves trying to fix a problem that was only in the present, not looking to the future and not considering that this could be only a temporary problem. So I think that's the thing right now. Like when you're talking about Dave versus David, is right now in Apple Podcasts, yes, it only searches one or the other. But in your case, that's fine because people know you by only one of those names.
Yeah.
And that's how you want to be known as well. So if you try to fix a problem for now, it's just going to look clunky. It's going to sound clunky on the smart speakers. And Apple may see that and say, this is just pointless for you to list David, Davey, Dave,
the D-man.
Yeah. Listing all of those in there would just be wasting space, hurting the experience for people, hurting the experience when people browse the Apple Podcast catalog. And instead, just do what you need it to be now, and the systems will eventually catch up.
Yeah. Gabrielle says if you search David Jackson on Google, I know there was a famous player in England. There's a writer. I know 5 David Jacksons in Akron, Ohio alone. And so I was just like, well, like I said, I Googled both. The one that had the least was the one I went with. So, but my brother calls me Davey. He's the only one that's allowed to do that. And the people at church, everybody else, I will answer to either.
So Mystic Mac says, so I should remove the word podcast from my show title. Daniel?
I would.
Yeah, I would too. Okay. You get them so much stronger of a branding that way as well. Like think of it this way. You ask people, hey, can I have a Pringle? You don't say, can I have a Pringle chip? and they're Pringles. They're not Pringle chips.
Yeah.
It's just, it feels awkward at first, but it's a much stronger name if you can remove both the word podcast, or in place of it, the word show, and remove the word the if it's not necessary. Now, in my podcast title, The Audacity to Podcast, the and the word podcast are necessary in there. So if you wanted to speak generically about it, it would be technically correct to say the Audacity to Podcast. But thankfully, only one person in history that I've heard of has done it that way. And I applauded them for doing it correctly. So yeah, try removing the word podcast unless it's part of a bigger brand. Like if I feel like I have to poke up my head.
I'm sorry.
If you the curse of lower halves,
right?
Yeah. Well, they need to implement this a little bit better. That should move us all up. So that big of a comment. But anyways, go ahead.
So if home gadget geeks, for example, if that was a big brand, so you have a product line, you have consulting services, you have a whole business behind Home Gadget Geeks, then it makes sense to call the podcast the Home Gadget Geeks Show or the Home Gadget Geeks Podcast, because you probably have other Home Gadget Geeks things, like the Home Gadget Geeks Meetup. I'm just going to say HGG.
Yeah, that's fine.
the HGG show, the HGG book, the HGG movie, that kind of stuff. I mean, like even, some movies do include the word movie in it, like the best movie of all time right now.
The Lego movie.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that 70s show, right? That's that 70s show.
Yeah.
The word show is actually a kind of an integral part of the title and sets it apart as a title as opposed to describing what it is. Right. And so, it's good advice. And so Daniel, if you had, say you have podcast or show in your title today and you're like, okay, I'm going to pull it. Is it just a matter of going into the feed, making sure your feed title is changed? It'll update through the system and do it. Is it that easy?
Yep.
Yeah. Everything should refresh from your RSS feed. Even now, my podcast reviews will refresh the title, of the show, which we just implemented that feature this week.
Cool.
But
how's that going?
It's going pretty well. We've closed the free plan, which has enabled us to do so much more. And in the coming week, especially everyone who's been paying only $5 a month or on that plan is going to get a nice feature bump very soon. We're doing some testing on something to see if we can afford to do this, but it looks like we can. So some cool stuff coming there.
Cool. Where would people go if they wanted to participate in this program, where they get their reviews from all around the world once a week, if that's what they want?
Go to schoolofpodcasting.com/NPR. That is Dave's affiliate link. So he does earn a commission from that, but Dave is a paying customer himself. I've even offered it to him for free, but he said, no, I want to pay for this.
Yeah, no, I pay for it as well. I get every week. I love it. I don't get a lot of reviews, but if I did get one, it would show up for me. Dave, you were going to say something?
Well, if you haven't heard Daniel's latest episode on Are There Too Many Podcasts, that's definitely worth a listen. The whole time I was listening in the shower, like, yes, keep going. Preach on, brother. It was like,
I'm sure I wanted to know you listened to my podcast. Unless you never shower naked.
No, I'm actually in there. Clothes. I'm actually making my breakfast.
Get a swimsuit on.
I'm eating. Wasn't there a podcast? I have it on my notes here. Eating fried chicken in the shower is a podcast from one of the guys. And Daniel, what was the one you were listening to about a fish?
No Such Thing as a Fish.
Okay, those are some names that I was like, all right, those are unique.
Yeah, which has nothing to do with fish. It's
right.
It's a fact show, a really fun fact show that the whole thing, there's no such thing as a fish, came from like an early dictionary actually said there is no such thing as a fish. That was one of their first facts that they discussed with each other, and therefore that's the name of their podcast.
Yeah, they're throwing out the phrase internet radio. You can't. I've done radio. I did Dates from Hell show. But I've had people that have like, and then trying, especially if they have a slightly older audience, it'll be like blah, blah, blah radio because it's audio and their audience will tie into that. I like shows.
Yeah. Instead of radio is talk show.
Yeah.
Right.
People know, everyone who knows radio knows talk show probably.
Yeah. I think we're getting to the point where that's not going to be, explaining it is not going to be necessary anymore. I don't think we're going to have to constantly be, well, it's kind of like a radio talk show, or it's kind of like radio, except you listen to it on the internet or internet radio.
Because there's going to be people like, what's radio?
No, totally. I think in the next year or two, I think we're kind of beyond having to explain what it is. And really it's more about where do I consume it? Because is it a YouTube instance? Am I listening to it as a podcast? Am I getting it through Instagram? Am I watching it live on Facebook? Right? There's all those different ways of doing it. And so I think we're getting away from that and getting more to what's the platform it's on. You know, I think the key is to get a brand and then stick with that brand. Like really, right? Get a good brand name and then stick with that brand.
Yeah. The other thing that I see people get confused over is the word show, podcast, and episode. So for me, a show is a podcast and an episode is an episode. Because half the time when I'm doing tech support, somebody will come in and say, I can't get my one show to play.
So you said that show is a podcast. What is a podcast?
A podcast is a show.
But so is this one episode that we're recording right now?
Is it a podcast?
It will be when in its audio form.
It's part of the Ask the Podcast Coach podcast, but it's an episode.
Yeah.
But it is. It's I understand why it's confusing, but I try to.
Yeah, I agree with you. Podcast is the series.
Yeah.
So podcast refers to the series. If we say podcast level,
I
we're
like
the series level. And then
I like series actually better than show.
Yeah.
Because series, people think of, okay, Seinfeld is the series, Soup Nazi is the episode.
Right. And it can go to some grammatical things that I wish Grammar Girl could be here to chime in. But like stuff like how the word podcast comes from, it's a portmanteau of iPod and broadcast. Mm-hmm. So does that mean it follows the same grammatical uses as the word broadcast? Or is it something different? Like, for example, the past verb tense of broadcast, like to say that you did a broadcast, you would say, I broadcast this. You wouldn't say I broadcast-id with an ed. Some people do say that, but the preferred form is broadcast as the past form. So is that the same for podcast? Would you say, I podcast about that 6 weeks ago? Or would you say, I podcasted about that 6 weeks ago? Does it follow the same grammatical forms? That gets deeper.
No, I like it. I like that conversation though, because it is interesting when we took a noun and a verb and jammed them together to really make this word podcast out of it. And then it took so long for people to figure out what it was, and it's gone through various iterations in the process. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, she's asking, how do I pull up Dave Jackson onto an Alexa? See, I just said the magic word. How do I say it into an Echo?
So how would you, so if you have, I think you have to have something enabled, right? You have to have a skill enabled for the various platforms to listen to it on.
I do have a skill for the School of Podcasting.
Yeah.
And it's sad because I can't remember what the key phrase is to enable it. Maybe just enable School of Podcasting.
Can't you tie your Apple account? You can.
Apple, Spotify, and TuneIn. So if you just say Woman in the Tube, play School of Podcasting on Spotify, in theory, she will play the School of Nursing, because that's usually what happens.
Home Gadget Geeks, I think I can get that to work just by saying, Lady A, play Home Gadget Geeks. If I want it from TuneIn, I'd say from TuneIn. If I want it from Spreaker, actually, I can say, I think I say, Lady A, start Spreaker. Enable, I think it's start Spreaker. And then it goes into the Spreaker app. And then when I'm in the Spreaker app.
Is that just me or is that him?
No, it stopped for me too.
And he's back.
Oh, here we go. Well, it didn't matter anyways. Maybe it was dumb what I was saying. Maybe that was StreamYard filtering my content.
Yeah. Why do I have to say first 3 or 4 words of my season order to help come up with? Because what is that called? Verbal search, word, audio search is, well, first of all, physical search on a website is not great in Apple Podcasts. So word search is even worse, especially when you get into words like mompreneur. Like, have fun trying to get that to come up in that. So
yeah,
it's blending the word pod or cast with everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's going to be, it's tricky, and it just doesn't, I wish it was easier. Maybe that's why people aren't listening as much on smart devices, is it takes a while. I wish there was there is an app. I mean, I can Bluetooth my phone and I listen on Overcast on my, what's her name, speaker. That's what I do. And then I stop it with my watch. I'm now listening to more podcasts at work because I can stop it with my Apple Watch, which is tying the phone, which is Bluetooth, to the speaker.
Yeah, I still think it's clunky.
Yeah, it is
on these devices. It's still clunky. Maybe it's clunky because there's too many options. Like, I literally can play the podcast 3 or 4 different ways.
Yeah.
And then you got to kind of remember kind of what that is. I think that still needs to get easier, So like, if I say I would never do this, but say I wanted to listen to Home Gadget Geeks on the device. Once I've done it a bunch of times, it should figure out, like, okay, this is a thing. Like, does it?
Maybe I don't use the devices to play podcasts, but how you can say, like Dave said, on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, you can go into the app and change the default. And I would suspect that they do eventually offer that to you. And the reason for that is when I have my son with me, I wake up at a certain time. When he's not with me, I wake up at a different time. So those times that I tell my device to set an alarm, after a little while, she asks me, do you want me to set this alarm for every day? So there is some learning there. And I would expect that maybe those devices would eventually learn, like it hears you always saying on Apple Podcasts. So then it maybe at some point, since this is an option, you can switch inside of your device settings. Maybe there would be that thing where it pops up and says, would you like me to make Apple Podcasts your default podcast?
Right.
Nice.
I did notice I've been playing rain sounds at night through the device. And one time it prompted me. So I said, it'll play for an hour and then it drops. But it prompted me and said, I can play this on a loop if you just tell me to. So I said, hey, play this on a loop. And then she came back and said, I'm going to remember that setting for you until you change it.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
now I just say it and it automatically plays it on a loop. The other thing that's freaky, if you haven't done this yet, whisper to your device.
Oh, that's fun.
It will whisper back to you,
Yeah.
which is just super weird. So in the mornings when I wake up and I'll say, hey, what time is it? And she'll come back to me with the time, whispering. It's
Nice.
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
One last question here as we start to wrap things up. I do not play music on my show. What's the advice about starting in my second season, Metal Music Week? Really just doing this to integrate my first interviews in my, I'm not sure I understand the question. But playing music, number one, just make sure it's royalty free, pod safe, whatever you want to do for that. Anybody else? Can you expand on that question? Because
is she referring to, like, how do I start a second season on that? Is that kind of the question, Daniel?
Well, that's where you go.
Take the question down, Dave.
Welcome to
take the question down. There we go.
welcome to season 2 of Metal Weekly. You hit record.
Well, there is that season tag that you can enable. Not all players respect it or use it or honor it. Some do. So you can kind of create that second. You can do it that way. I think you could add it to whatever your intro is. If you have a standard intro, you could add that verbally.
The great thing about your show is it's yours and you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. So
yeah, but there are some good best
practices. There are best practices. Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah, Daniel has a lot of them. So Daniel, before we go, what's the future? What do you got coming up with your stuff? What do you Audacity to podcast? What are you hoping for over the next couple months?
Well, since I've had that hiatus for 2 years,
I
relaunched the show and then went on hiatus again because some stuff came up. So for me, it's just trying to get back into momentum and keep up with putting episodes out weekly and planning ahead for that, trying to batch record when I can. Some of the upcoming episodes that I've got coming, are the next episode is about the 7 different kinds of images that you can make for your podcast. And that whole thing about podcast versus episode, that I talk about that in that episode, actually.
Good.
Nice.
Good.
That'll publish on Tuesday. And then after that, I want to talk about some of the terminologies in podcasting, like indie versus corporate and hobbyist versus professional, and helping that kind of define those a little bit so that we might use those terms properly. But then from the business side, really just focusing on improving podcaster society and my podcast reviews.
Good. I like the improvements you've done so far. Good work on the review site. It's looking good, and the service is working great. So if folks haven't signed up for that, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Same time, same bat channel. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. We'll see everybody next week. Thanks
Daniel,
again
thanks
to the
for
chat
jumping
room.
in.
Yeah,
You
thanks
bet.
for jumping in, buddy.
See you guys.
We'll see you. Take care.
Oh, I wanted